Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to use the XLR module on the Sony FX3. Okay, so let's start by going into detail on the left side of the module, which contains all of the main inputs and settings. I'll go through these one at a time in detail. So let's start with the Input 1 control section. This is the first section on the left of the audio module. First of all, you'll see the ATT switch. The ATT switch controls signal attenuation. Attenuation is used to reduce the input level received from the mic in 3 steps from 0 to 20 dB. Start with this switch at 0 dB because that will introduce the least amount of noise from the camera's built-in audio preamps. You can come back later and change this. You can either set it to 10 dB or 20 dB depending on what kind of levels you're getting from your microphone. We'll leave that at 0 for now and move on and talk about the signal level switch. The signal level switch tells the camera what kind of signal is being sent into the XLR input. So it could be a line level from maybe audio gear, microphone level from most microphones, or you've got mic plus 48 volts, which is for any mic which requires phantom power to work. So it's worth always checking the specification of your microphone to see whether or not it does require phantom power. And if it doesn't, make sure to switch that off before you connect the mic to the camera. For mine, I'm going to set mine to mic plus 48 because in this example, I'm using a Sennheiser MKH416, which is just above my head here. So that does require phantom power. So I'm going to set mine to plus 48 volts. So next we're going to move on to the input level section. Now you've got 2 options here. You've got the input level selector switch, which lets you choose between auto and manual. And also you've got the input level dial. So next we'll move on to the input 2 section. Now this is very much similar to input 1, except if you look at the input level switch, as well as auto and manual, we also have link. So setting this switch to link disables the level control from input 2 and just shares the same level control from input 1. The link feature can be really useful if you're just going to use one microphone in XLR1 and you want that to record on 2 channels and have them set to exactly the same level, because then you're controlling both channels with just the one level dial. So moving along from the input 2 section, to the right we've got the low cut filter options. So the low cut filter will remove the kind of lowest bass frequencies from the signal as it's recording the audio. Now this can be useful if you're trying to deal with, say, a low hum with an air conditioning unit, or you're dealing with a kind of rumbling from wind noise or something. However, I tend to choose not to use this because that's always something that can be done in post, and I'd rather not mess with the audio at the time of recording it. And then finally, on that side of the audio module, we've got the input 3 controls. Now, because input 3 is a 3.5mm jack, we don't have so many controls over the signal level and the signal type. All we really have there is an auto manual switch and the level dial. So finally, it's worth noting that on the left side of the handle below the audio module, there is a switch that will enable and disable the audio module's features. If you switch this off, then you can use the 3.5mm mic input on the camera and the audio level controls in the camera as you would in the same way as if you didn't have the handle fitted. But in order to use the audio module, you have to have that switch set to on. So next, let's take a look at the input select switch, which is on the back of the module underneath a plastic cover. This is really important because by default, the FX3 will record to 2 channels. And what this switch does is it tells the camera which inputs to record to those 2 channels. Setting the input select switch to in3 will send the audio from input 3, which is a 3.5mm jack, to channels 1 and 2. When using this setting, neither input 1 nor input 2 will be recorded at all. Okay, so the next setting on the input select switch is in 1, in 2. Now what this does is it puts input 1 into channel 1 of the audio and input 2 into channel 2 of the audio. The last option is in 1. Now what this does is it takes the signal from input 1 and it will actually record that to channel 1 and channel 2. Okay, so next I'm going to move on and show you some of the most common configurations you're likely to want to use on the FX3. I'll show you how I connect each mic to the camera for that configuration and the settings required to make that work. And also give you a few other ideas of how you can use the settings in the module to your advantage. So to begin with, I'll show you what's probably the most common configuration, and that's using one XLR microphone into input 1 of the camera. So let's start with the input select switch on the back of the module. You want to set that to in 1. Next, set the input 1 attenuator to wherever is required for your microphone. I'll set mine to 0. And then you want to set the input signal to whatever type of microphone you're using. I'm going to choose mic plus 48 volts for my shotgun mic, but you need to just check what you need for yours. After that, we're going to set the level control switch to either manual or auto, depending on how you're going to be shooting. And then you can go ahead and connect the microphone to input 1. So for this first configuration, let's go ahead and use link. Looking at the input 2 section, change the level control to link, and then we're using the same dial on input 1 to control both channels 1 and channel 2. So when you're recording audio, you want to try and set the levels so that they're topping out at around -6 to -12 dB. That way you've got a bit of headroom should there something get a bit louder. And you can see an example of that on my screen now. So at the moment we're recording 2 channels of audio which are identical because it's all coming from one microphone and then being split to both channels. So this is kind of a waste really. Having 2 identical channels of audio doesn't really give us any advantages. So let me go ahead and show you some ways that you can use the second audio channel to give you some options when it comes to editing the footage. Okay, so the first option I'm going to talk about is what I call an auto backup. It's basically where you set input 2 so that it's set to auto. So if you're using input 1 set to manual and you're riding the levels, that's great. That's the way I tend to prefer to work. But if something were to happen, like there were a loud noise or the levels were to drop and you weren't on the ball and changed it really quickly, then it could affect your recording. So if you set input 2 to auto instead of linking it, then what will happen is input 1 will record using the level you set on the level dial, but input 2 will set its own levels depending on the ambient noise that it's picking up. Say you were filming an event and then suddenly people started clapping. Now that can get quite loud. And you'll see that channel 1 may be peaking, whereas channel 2 will probably handle it a bit better. Another really useful way of using the 2 channels with just one microphone is if you set the second channel to also be manual, and we're going to put the dial on this one a little bit lower than it is on input 1. And this can be really useful because if the audio does peak in channel 1, then there's a good chance that channel 2 will still be good. I'm going to talk quite loud into this microphone, and I expect that input 1 is probably now peaking. Hopefully, input 2, because it's been set at a lower level, won't be peaking. Now it's worth remembering that if you're using either of these techniques whereby you're recording channel 2 at a slightly lower or different level than channel 1, when it comes to editing them in post-production, you'll want to make sure that you only enable one at a time. You don't want them both to be enabled. So let's jump into Final Cut now and I'll show you how that works. So you can see here that we've got both channels of audio enabled at the moment, and as you can hear me talking now, you'll be able to hear both channels. And what you really want to do is enable just one. So let's turn off channel 2, and then you'll hear that as I'm talking, so this will sound fine on its own. So it's as easy as that. You really just have to make sure you select the channel that you want to use and not have them both switched on. They're really there just to give you 2 options depending on what happens with the levels while you're recording. So next we're going to talk about configuring the camera to use 2 XLR inputs. Okay, so first of all we set the input select to in 1, in 2. Set the input 1 signal to mic or mic plus 48 volts. In this case my Sony receiver doesn't need 48 volts, so I'm just going to select mic. So I'll choose manual for the level control, and now I'll go ahead and connect the microphone. Now that we've got the camera configured and the wireless mic is connected to input 2, it's actually going to be recording input 1 to channel 1 and input 2 to channel 2. If I select channel 1, this is the channel which includes the shotgun mic, and then if I jump to channel 2, this is the channel which includes the lav mic. So it's really nice being able to choose which one of those 2 mics works best for your production. Now obviously you can still use the independent controls from input 1 and input 2. You can switch these individually to either auto or manual, and obviously that will affect that relevant channel. But you can still use the link switch. If you've got 2 microphones connected into input 1 and 2 and you choose link, then the input 1 level will control both microphones. This isn't really ideal if you've got two different types of microphone. But if you're using, say, a stereo microphone, which has two XLR connectors, that's when you'd want to use link, because then you know you're getting the same level to both channels. Okay, so the final configuration we're going to talk about in this video is just using the 3.5mm input, which is input 3. Okay, so for this we want to set the input select on the rear of the module to in 3, and then just set the input 3 level control to either manual or auto, depending on your requirements. Okay, so in my example, this microphone is mono, so this is going to record the same signal to both channel 1 and channel 2. If you wanted to use something like a stereo microphone or something like the new Rode Wireless Go that allows you to split the signal into a stereo using two transmitters, the same will apply. You set this up exactly the same way. It's worth remembering that there's only one input level dial for channel 3. So if you are using two separate microphones that are feeding into one jack, you have to remember that you cannot individually set the levels for each of those mics. So I think we'll leave it there for this video. We've covered off quite a lot of ground. We've covered using a single XLR mic, dual XLR mics, and the 3.5mm input. In the next video, we'll talk about switching to 4-channel audio recording and all of the additional things that you do need to think about when you do that. If you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, then when I do release the video, you'll be notified, and then we can continue looking into audio recording on the Sony FX3. And with that, I'll say goodbye and see you in the next one.